They assured me it was only for one night, just until the plumbers finished. Kylie smiled as she nudged my suitcase into the motel room. Andrew, wearing the distracted, guilty expression he'd had since his father's passing, kissed my cheek. "We'll pick you up in the morning, Mom, I promise," he said. I watched their car fade away through the torn blinds, the taillights vanishing like an afterthought, but sleep eluded me. There was something unsettling about how they avoided eye contact and how my wallet had accidentally stayed in Andrew's car. My instincts sensed something was wrong before my mind did. The room had the scent of bleach and mildew, and the TV, bolted to the dresser, flickered when I tried the remote. I didn't bother unpacking. I had only packed a weekend bag, a change of clothes, my medications, and the thick envelope of documents I never left home without. At least I had that. My birth certificate, house deed, and bank statements were tucked in a zippered pouch, a habit formed decades ago when I learned not to trust anyone with important paperwork. The next morning, I opened the curtain to find an empty parking lot. No Andrew, no Kylie, no phone call. I picked up the motel room phone, but it was dead. No dial tone. I reached for my cell on the nightstand, discovering it had no service. That's when I realized the envelope was missing. The pouch, the papers, gone. Frantically, I searched through my bag, the drawers, under the mattress. Nothing. My heart pounded heavily, unsteadily, as it had since my bypass surgery. Thankfully, I still had my pills, but no ID, no cash, no cards, nor documents. Just a woman in a polyester dress and yesterday's makeup, alone. I went to the front desk where a young girl, probably no more than 20, chewed gum apathetically. "Hi, I was dropped off here last night. My name is Margaret Delaney. I think there's been a mistake. My son was supposed to pick me up," I explained. She blinked, tapped her keyboard, and said, "No reservation under that name. You checked in yesterday as a walk-in. Cash only, no ID." I stared at her. "That can't be. My son made the reservation and brought me here." She shrugged. "You're checked out as of 9 a.m., but I'm still in the room. The room's been reassigned. I need to call my son." "No phone service today," she said, already turning away. "Try the place next door. They have a diner." I stumbled into the sunlight like a tipsy woman. I was 74 years old, never arrested, never missed a mortgage payment, never borrowed beyond my means. I raised Andrew alone after Harold passed, worked 2 jobs to get him through school, and now I stood outside a rundown motel, treated like some transient who overstayed her welcome. At the diner, the waitress let me use the landline. I dialed Andrew first. It rang 3 times and went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. Tried again. Same result. Then I called Kylie. Her phone went directly to voicemail. I tried the house phone. Disconnected. It took 2 bus rides and a long walk to reach our street, my street, Chestnut Avenue, where we've lived since 1983. My roses still bloomed along the path, my hydrangeas overgrown, needing a trim. Despite everything, I smiled a bit. Then I reached the door, and my key didn't work. I stood there, baffled, trying it repeatedly until the key bent. I knocked, then rang. Nothing. Finally, a neighbor appeared. Janice McCready from across the street, with her yappy dog and perpetually linty sweaters. "Oh, Margaret," she said, clearly flustered. "Janice, do you know what's happening? My key, I think. I'm not sure I should. Andrew mentioned you were moving out. relocating to assisted living near the coast. Said you'd already left. I felt the blood drain from my face. What? That moving truck came yesterday morning. I saw them take your things. I assumed, Margaret, are you okay? I turned away before she could touch me, walked around the house. The back door had a new lock. The garage code panel was gone. Every window sealed tight. Even my bedroom curtains replaced with white. Cold and unfamiliar, I stood in the garden for a long time. I wasn't crying yet. I was calculating. I knew where Andrew banked, the notary who helped draft my will, and the contact at the county records office who once praised my raspberry jam, saying, "You're sharper than most people half your age." I wasn't broken yet. That night, I stayed at a women's shelter downtown. It was clean and quiet, and the lady at the front desk offered me tea without asking questions when I said I had nowhere else to go. I lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, my body aching and the cold seeping into my knees, but I was already planning. Tomorrow, I'd start with the bank, then the notary, then the county. I might be 74 and tired, but I still knew how to take care of myself. They thought they could erase me, but they were wrong. The bank was my first stop. I arrived as the doors opened, the morning sun low enough to cast long shadows across the sidewalk. Inside, the air smelled of printer paper and air conditioning. I approached the customer service desk with my back straight and my jaw set. "Good morning," I said calmly. "I need to speak to someone about my accounts. My name is Margaret Delaney." The young woman behind the counter smiled politely. "Do you have your ID, Mrs. Delaney?" "No," I replied. "It's been stolen." She hesitated. "I'm afraid I'll need some form of identification." "I've been a customer here for 40 years. I interrupted. "I opened my first account when you were in diapers. You'll find my face on the anniversary wall behind you, third from the left." She glanced uncertainly. "Let me get the branch manager." His name was Eric, and he'd started at the bank about a decade ago, fresh out of college and still learning how to tie a tie. Once I'd given him a mint when he looked pale, and ever since he'd called me Mrs. D with a genuine fondness. He emerged from the frosted glass office, his smile faltering slightly when he saw me. "Mrs. Delaney," he said, stepping forward. "Everything—" "No," I said. "I need to know what's been done to my accounts. I suspect someone has acted on my behalf without my consent." He glanced at me and motioned towards the office. "Come on in." Once inside, I took a seat as he accessed my information. There was a recent update, he mentioned, eyes fixed on the screen. "Your son Andrew presented a notarized power of attorney, granting him full access." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "When?" I asked. 3 days ago, he replied. "That was the day they dropped me off." "I didn't authorize anything," I insisted. Eric looked uneasy. "The document was notarized, and we have a copy on file." "I want to see it," I demanded. He hesitated, but printed the pages. There was my name and my signature, except it wasn't mine. It mimicked my cursive, but it was too smooth. I never added that little loop in my G's, and I never dotted my I's with circles. "Forgery," I said, placing the paper down with trembling hands. Eric sighed. "Mrs. Delaney, if you suspect fraud, we can escalate this, but a formal complaint is required. We'll need to temporarily freeze the accounts during the investigation." "Do it," I replied. "Are you sure?" "This will cut off all access, including your son's." "That's the point. I asserted. He nodded and started typing. As he worked, I gazed out the office window at the passing cars, imagining one might be Andrew's. Perhaps he was heading to another meeting about selling my house, or maybe sipping a latte, telling someone how confused I seemed in my old age. Maybe he thought I'd give up. When Eric finished, he turned to me. "I'll flag everything," he said, "and contact our legal team. But you'll need to file a police report and consult an attorney." "I already have someone in mind," I responded. My next stop was the notary's office, not the one Andrew used, as I hadn't identified them yet, but the one I trusted, Donna LaRue. She had notarized my will, house deed, and durable medical power of attorney. She knew my real signature as well as her own. Donna glanced at the forged document and snorted, "This isn't your handwriting." She pointed and said, "This stamp isn't genuine. The notary ID doesn't match any current ones in the state." I blinked. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "It's a cheap copy job, too. I've seen better forgeries from high school pranksters." I glanced at the paper again. My name, a fake signature, a fake stamp. They really thought I wouldn't notice. "They think you're old," Donna said gently. "They're banking on people not believing you. But you believe me. I always have." I left her office with copies, an affidavit, and an appointment with a lawyer Donna recommended, a sharp woman named Lynette Reyes, who once drove a nursing home chain into bankruptcy. By the time I reached the county building to verify the house deed, the weight of it all began to settle on me. My body ached. My legs throbbed. I hadn't eaten all day. Still, I went in and gave the clerk my name. She typed, clicked, frowned. "There was a transfer filed yesterday," she said. "Property reassigned under joint ownership. Margaret Delaney and Andrew Delaney." I closed my eyes. Was there a witness? Was I present? The clerk looked uneasy. "I'm not allowed to say, ma'am, but you can file a contest. You'll need to speak with the assessor and submit documentation. Then give me the forms." That night, I stayed in a shelter again, a different one this time, quieter. A volunteer offered me a cup of soup, which I drank slowly, letting the warmth spread through my hands. They thought I'd crumble, too old, too confused, too tired to fight back. But they forgot who I am. They forgot I raised a son, built a life from scratch, balanced checkbooks when every dollar counted, stood in line at the DMV with the sick baby on my hip and groceries in the other arm. They forgot I'm Margaret Delaney, and I'm not finished yet. The next morning, I woke before dawn, my body still aching from the cot, my nerves sharpened. I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at my hands in the dim shelter light. They were thinner now, more veined than I remembered, but steady. I could still trust them. Hold a pen to sign my name correctly, to unlock doors no one thought I would find. By 8:30, I was outside Lynette Reyes's office. The building was modest, made of brick, located downtown, and didn't have any flashy signage, just her name in small letters on the glass, which told me everything I needed to know. Successful lawyers don't need neon signs. Inside, her assistant, a tidy young man named Cody, offered me coffee and assisted me in completing a simple intake form. He didn't blink when I mentioned I didn't have an ID. "We'll handle that," he said calmly, and led me into Lynette's office. Lynette appeared to be someone who could make a judge uneasy with just a raised eyebrow. She was in her mid-50s, had a no-nonsense demeanor, and her hair, streaked with gray, was tied in a bun like lightning bolts. She stood to shake my hand. "Margaret Delaney, Donna mentioned you, said you have a forged POA and family boundary issues." "I have more than that," I replied. "I have a son who left me in a motel, emptied my house, and forged my signature to take everything." She nodded once. "Start from the beginning." So I recounted the motel, the missing documents, the fake power of attorney, the altered deed, and the bank accounts. She didn't interrupt, just took notes and asked for specific dates and names. When I finished, she leaned back and exhaled slowly. "This is a clear case of elder financial abuse," she said. "You're fortunate you caught it early. Most people don't realize until everything is sold or gone. I only realized because I couldn't get back into my house." "Well," she said, "we'll make sure you do. What can we do first?" "File an emergency injunction to freeze any financial activities linked to your name, especially with real estate. Then we contest the POA, request a fraud investigation, and if needed, pursue criminal charges. A forged signature is a felony, and if your son's wife was involved, she's accountable too." "I don't want to ruin his life," I said softly, taken aback by my own words, "but I want mine back." Lynette looked at me steadily. "Then we'll handle this swiftly and discreetly. You might need to stay under the radar for a while. If he finds out if he's acting legally, he might attempt to sell the house or drain accounts before we can freeze them. I've already frozen the bank accounts. The manager is an old friend, so that was possible." "You're ahead of the game," she said, handing me a packet of papers and a schedule for the upcoming week, including an affidavit to sign, hearings to prepare for, and evidence to gather. Then she paused. "Margaret, do you have a safe place to stay?" I shook my head. "There's a shelter downtown that's clean enough." Her expression softened briefly. "Give me a moment," she said, stepping out. A few minutes later, Cody returned with a note in hand. "We've arranged a temporary apartment through a partner nonprofit," he said. "It's small, but secure, rent-free, just until we get things sorted." I wanted to protest, my pride flaring up, but I was exhausted and realized this wasn't charity. It was strategy. "Thank you," I said. That night, I sat on a real bed in a quiet room with a locked door and a working lamp. The apartment was tiny but dignified, with a kitchenette, a small desk, and a bathroom with clean towels. I turned on the faucet just to hear the sound of something that was mine again. I took out a notepad and started listing everything I remembered losing. The house on Chestnut Avenue, the primary checking account, the pension account, automatic deposits, forged power of attorney, insurance contacts, and Social Security information. Then I began another list of people who believed me: Donna, Eric at the bank, Lynette, myself. I circled that last name twice. The next day, Lynette filed the emergency injunction. We had a hearing date, but I needed to prepare in the meantime. I took the bus across town to the Central Records office and spoke to a clerk named Rosalind, who still wore the same bright green glasses I remembered from years ago when I used to drop off Harold's property taxes. She greeted me with a cautious smile. "Mrs. Delaney, I haven't seen you in a while." "I've been busy losing my life to my son's ambitions," I replied dryly. "I need any records of deed transfers from the past 10 days." She refrained from asking questions, simply printing them out and discreetly passing them over the counter. There it was, inked and sealed with the county's mark, a new deed listing Andrew Delaney as a joint owner through voluntary transfer and agreement. My signature appeared pristine, too pristine. Rosalind leaned in, mentioning he had come in with a woman, blonde, possibly in her mid-30s, who seemed anxious and signed quickly. I thanked Kylie and left. At the pharmacy, I paid cash for a week's worth of my medication. That part frightened me most. Not the legal battle, not losing the house, not even the financial concerns, but the fear of waking up one morning with nothing in my system to keep me upright. I couldn't afford to show weakness. That evening in the apartment, I examined the deed once more. I thought of the hydrangeas, my bookshelves, and the teacups Harold brought from Tokyo, all now under someone else's name. No, not someone else's, still mine. I vowed to reclaim it, page by page, signature by signature, even if it meant walking into court in orthopedic shoes and a coat too thin for spring. I would do it because they believed dropping me off marked the end, but it wasn't. It was just the beginning. I awoke early, before the sun filtered through the apartment blinds. My body was unaccustomed to stillness, having been conditioned by years of alarm clocks, Harold's coughs, and Andrew's nighttime cries to rise before the world. Old habits, like old wounds, don't fade quietly. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of instant coffee, reviewing the photocopies of the falsified deed. Lynette had highlighted voluntary transfer. That word, voluntary, burned more fiercely than any betrayal. There was nothing voluntary about being abandoned in a motel without money or phone access. Nothing voluntary about watching your life repackaged under someone else's name. Lynette had set our first court date, a motion hearing to freeze the house deed and prevent Andrew from selling it. It was scheduled for the following Thursday, giving us 5 days. I spent those days gathering evidence. I first went for the moving company. The task wasn't difficult, as there was only one major business in our area. Initially, the girl behind the counter was cautious, but once I explained my identity and what I needed, she eased up. "Your son mentioned you were already in assisted living," she said, while tapping on her keyboard. "He claimed you'd signed everything over." He had lied. She blinked, then quietly printed the service order and invoice. Andrew's name appeared on every line, his signature clean and neat, unlike the hurried scrawl I'd seen on his birthday cards since he was 10. My next stop was the local post office, where the mail forwarding slip was also signed electronically, redirecting to a P.O. box, not even his own residence. The clerk explained it was labeled temporary, with no mention of me. Each lie piled on like kindling. I was no longer angry but precise. There's a distinction. Lynette met with me that Friday afternoon to review my findings, and she was satisfied. "This shows a pattern," she noted, "deliberate misrepresentation. He not only acted without your consent, but attempted to erase your presence from every document. He wants my house," I said, "and my silence." She smiled. "Well, he can't have both." On Saturday, I returned to the street where my house was located. I took the bus again, no car or taxi, just the city behind me, and a tote bag filled with records in my arm. I didn't intend to go inside. I just wanted a glimpse. But something caught my eye from the sidewalk, a van in the driveway, The back doors open, men unloading large cardboard boxes. One bore the name Stagecraft Interiors on its side. I stepped closer. Kylie stood on the porch, clipboard in hand, directing workers on where to place a faux marble pedestal in the living room. I saw through the open door they were staging my house for sale. I walked up the lawn like I belonged there, because I did, and stopped at the base of the porch. Kylie's face turned pale upon seeing me. "Margaret," she said, with that overly bright voice people use when they're unsure. "Who's watching? What a surprise," I remarked calmly. "This is my home, and I see you're redecorating." She stood up straighter. "Well, it's under new ownership now. Andrew and I thought it would be best to refresh things. You always said the curtains needed changing?" She chuckled lightly. "I didn't. Does he know I'm here?" "He's at the office. Can I help you with something?" I glanced past her as a man carried out my antique mirror, the one handed down from my grandmother. "Tell your husband," I said, "that his mother isn't just a memory. She's a witness, and she's coming home." With that, I turned and walked down the sidewalk, the weight of the moment settling into my spine like iron. The following Monday, Lynette sent a cease and desist letter to the real estate agency. The staging company received orders to stop all work, and a warning was filed with the county clerk's office. We had halted the train, but not reversed it. That night, I found myself on the phone with someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Agnes, an old friend from church. We had lost touch after Harold passed. She answered on the second ring. "Margaret," she said, disbelief mingled with hope. "Hi, Aggie." We talked for hours about everything and nothing. She mentioned her knees were worse, her daughter had finally married, and her grandson had dropped out of college but taken up painting. I shared just enough. "They tried to erase me," I said softly. "They picked the wrong woman," she replied, and I believed her. The next morning, I took a cab to the courthouse and waited in the records office lobby for nearly an hour to speak with a clerk about an earlier version of the house deed. I wanted every trace of what was mine. As I sat, a woman walked in, mid-30s, tight ponytail, heels too sharp for comfort. Kylie. She hadn't seen me. She approached the front desk, murmuring something to the clerk. The clerk retrieved a file, and Kylie leaned over the counter, her brows furrowed, her voice slightly raised. "It's urgent. The sale is scheduled." Then she turned and saw me, and our eyes met. I didn't flinch as she turned pale again, then spun around and left. I watched the door close behind her and noticed the clerk glancing at me, uncertain. "Do you know her?" he asked. "She's intruding on memory," I replied softly, "but I'm reclaiming it." That night back at the apartment, I opened the small window above the sink. The air smelled of spring rain and pavement. I boiled water for tea and slowly removed my shoes. There was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Andrew standing there, silent at first, his expression unreadable, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets, like a child caught in mischief, trying to charm his way out. Andrew had always resembled Harold, with the same sloped shoulders and deep-set eyes. But now there was a fragile quality about him, as if the lies had started to harden beneath his skin. "Mom," he finally said. I didn't respond, leaving the door open as I returned inside. If he wanted to talk, he could follow. He did. The room seemed smaller with him in it. His presence, his cologne, even the sound of his expensive shoes on the linoleum felt too large for the space. I sat at the table while he stood, looking around as if unsure how to be in a room that wasn't designed by a decorator or staged for approval. "This is where you're living now?" he asked. "For now," I replied, "until the court hears my case." He flinched a little. "You didn't need to go that far." "No," I said, "you didn't need to go that far." The silence lingered between us until he finally exhaled, running a hand through his hair, which was now grayer than I remembered, perhaps due to stress or simply time catching up with both of us. "I didn't mean for things to turn out this way," he said. "Kylie believed it was the best solution. The house was too much for you, and you were forgetting things." "I wasn't forgetting anything," I retorted. "You just stopped listening." He glanced away. "You lied to me," I continued, my voice low. "You took me to a motel and left me without a phone, money, or keys. You forged my signature, transferred the deed, and tried to erase me from my life." "That's not true," he replied. "Which part?" He didn't answer. "I changed your diapers, Andrew. I stayed up with you through colds, nightmares, and heartbreaks. I gave you everything I had, my time, my savings, my strength. And when I got old and slowed down, you decided I was a burden." "That's not fair," he whispered. "Fairness ended when you signed my name to a lie." He sat across from me, elbows on the table, as if suddenly too weary to bear the weight of his own guilt. "We were drowning," he said. "The mortgage, Kylie's medical bills, the twins, school fees. I kept thinking if I could just sell the house, get a little ahead, I could fix everything. I thought you'd understand. You didn't even ask." He didn't deny it, just stared at the chipped mug before him as if it held the answers. "Mom, I know it was wrong," he admitted. "But can't we resolve this quietly without dragging it all into court?" I leaned forward slightly. "You want me to stay silent so you can keep the house?" "I want us to heal," he said, "to move on." "You mean pretend it didn't happen? Let you keep what's not yours and call it peace?" "I didn't mean to hurt you." "But you did." He was silent for a long while. "I didn't expect you to fight back," he said finally. "That, more than anything, revealed everything I needed to know." "No," I said. "You didn't." I stood, and he did too. "I'm not your victim, Andrew. I'm not your burden. I'm your mother. And if I have to spend the rest of my life reminding you what, in court records, in sworn statements, I will." He looked at me, and something flickered across his face, regret perhaps, or the sudden understanding that I wasn't bluffing. "I'll see you in court," I said, and he left without another word. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, listening to the refrigerator's hum, the occasional passing car, the faint buzz of streetlights. My body ached, but my heart ached more. Yet, no part of me doubted my actions. I wasn't just protecting my home. I was defending the woman I had spent 74 years becoming. The next morning, Lynette called. "He came to see you, didn't he?" she asked. "Yes." "Good," she replied. "That means he's scared." "Should I be?" I asked. She paused. No, but you should be prepared." And I was, because when your own child forgets who you are, what you've given, what you've endured, you don't argue. You remind them. You restore yourself piece by piece until your name means something again. And I hadn't even begun. I stayed indoors for the next 2 days, not out of fear, but because I needed the quiet, the kind of silence that allows you to hear your own thoughts without the distraction of others' shame or excuses. I remained in the apartment with my notes, my papers, my coffee, cooling beside a stack of affidavits that began to feel like armor. I read every line of that fraudulent deed until the curves of my own name, copied and stolen, felt like bruises. By Wednesday morning, I was ready. Lynette picked me up at 8 sharp. She drove a small silver car that smelled faintly of lemon and steely determination. She didn't say much on the way to the courthouse, and I didn't need her to. We were 2 women heading into battle, each with different scars, but the same goal. At the courthouse entrance, I saw him. Andrew stood with Kylie by the marble steps, both dressed as if for a fundraiser. He in a tailored navy suit, she in a pearl-colored blouse, likely more expensive than my rent. They looked polished, presentable, intentional, but they flinched when they saw me. Good. We didn't exchange greetings. There was nothing. Inside the courtroom, everything seemed overly bright. The windows allowed in the relentless morning light that exposed every detail, line, and flaw. I sat next to Lynette, holding papers, as the clerk announced our case. Delaney versus Delaney. Motion for injunction. The judge, an older woman with sharp features and silver hair like mine, immediately gained my favor. Lynette spoke first, her voice steady and precise. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Margaret Delaney, has been subjected to a deliberate and illegal attempt to remove her from her residence and seize control of her financial resources through a forged power of attorney and unauthorized property transfer. She presented the evidence, bank statements, the forged signature, Donna's affidavit, and Rosalind's witness statement, each passing through the clerk's hands like stones forming a barrier between me and the deceit Andrew had constructed. Kylie sat beside Andrew, her arms tightly crossed, while Andrew's jaw tightened each time Lynette uttered, fraud. Then it was their turn. Their lawyer, overly slick with hair that appeared almost plastic, stood up with a smile that failed to reach his eyes. Your Honor, he began, this is a family issue, not a legal one. My clients acted with care and good intentions. Mrs. Delaney has demonstrated increasing forgetfulness and confusion, and they believed she would be safer in assisted care. He turned to me, his voice thick with emotion. No one wanted to hurt her, he said. I met his gaze directly, not blinking. The judge lifted the document. This signature, she stated, is already under forensic examination. The lawyer nodded. If there was a misunderstanding. It's not misunderstood. The judge interrupted. It's contested. There's a difference. Silence enveloped the room as everyone held their breath. I'm issuing a temporary injunction, she declared. All sales activities concerning the property will stop immediately. No access to funds without this court's approval. We'll schedule a full hearing to assess the validity of the transfer and the power of attorney. I exhaled slowly. Mrs. Delaney, the judge addressed me, I advise you to keep any personal documents and belongings you still have until we resolve this. I intend to, I replied. The gavel struck. Outside the courtroom, Andrew caught up with me. You didn't have to do this, Mom. You're causing a scene. No, I replied. I'm taking a stand. Kylie seemed like she wanted to speak but held back, perhaps sensing that nothing she could say would come out right. Not after the judge's tone, not after the careful paper trail we had laid out. Lynette and I walked away. Back in the apartment, I hung up my coat carefully and sat at the small table where it all began. Just me, a mug of coffee, and the sound of my own heartbeat, steady and sure. I didn't feel triumphant yet, but I felt something I hadn't in weeks, real, visible, present. That night, I pulled out a photo album I had managed to rescue before everything fell apart. I turned the pages slowly, Andrew in a dinosaur costume, me holding a cake shaped like a volcano, his first day of school, his college graduation, a younger me with tired eyes and proud hands. I wasn't perfect, but I had been there for every moment. Now, for once, I was going to be there for myself. The battle had only just begun, but I wasn't backing down. The apartment felt smaller the next morning, not because it had shrunk, but because the burden I carried into the situation had lightened. There's a unique energy that emerges after making that initial pushback. It feels like gaining momentum, akin to a train finally moving on rusty tracks. Although I wasn't near the finish line, I was no longer stagnant. That afternoon, I returned to the bank, not as a woman seeking answers, but as a client taking back control. Eric met me at the door. "We've seen the court's order," he said, guiding me inside. "I've flagged the accounts and frozen all activities under the disputed POA. Your funds are safe, Mrs. Delaney." I nodded. "Thank you, Eric. But I want more than just security. I want a fresh start." He understood immediately. "I want to close every joint account Andrew can access. I need new cards, new passwords, new signatures, everything." Without delay, he agreed to begin the process. We spent nearly an hour together as I signed forms, answered security questions, and reestablished my autonomy line by line. It felt like shedding layers of someone else's choices until I rediscovered my own voice. I also need to open a separate trust I mentioned for a future transfer. Eric didn't question its purpose. He simply nodded and handed over the forms. By the time I left, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow on the sidewalks. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to slow down and enjoy the evening air without worrying about a call or a new betrayal. Back at my apartment, I found a letter in my mailbox, typed envelope, no return address. Inside was a neatly folded note. "Mom, please call me. We need to talk. Things got out of hand." No signature, but the handwriting was Andrew's, smoother than in college, yet unmistakably his, trying to maintain calm amidst chaos. I set the note down on the counter. Did he wish to apologize or negotiate? Was he afraid of losing the house or losing me? The next morning, I met with Donna. She had agreed to help me draft a formal statement for the court, something personal in my own words. Her office was cozy, filled with the scent of paper and cinnamon candles, which I appreciated. Being professional didn't have to mean being cold. I brought my notes and told her. She smiled, as if to say she expected nothing less. We spent hours together, transforming my words into something not just emotional and outraged, but legally sound and truthful. When we finished, she looked at me and said, "This isn't just about getting your house back, is it?" I shook my head. "It's about my name, my voice, my role in the narrative." Donna nodded. "Then you're already ahead." Later that day, Lynette called. They've filed a response, she said. They're claiming your memory is unreliable, that you consented but forgot. They've attached letters from 2 doctors, neither of whom have treated you. My throat tightened. Can they do that? I asked. They can try, she replied, but they'll have to prove it in court. I've already arranged for a neurologist to assess you independently, someone with a strong reputation. They're grasping at straws, Margaret, Lynette continued. I glanced again at the envelope on my counter, the note unsigned. They're scared, I said. Yes, Lynette agreed. And when people are scared, they tend to make mistakes. Let them. That evening, I had another visitor. It wasn't Andrew this time. It was the twins. When I opened the door, there stood Emily and Ben, my grandchildren, just 19, hardly adults, their eyes filled with confusion and something else I couldn't quite identify. Hi, Grandma, Emily said, hesitating. We heard about what's happening, Ben added. They entered, sitting awkwardly on the couch, looking around the room as if it were a museum. I made tea. What else do you do when a lost part of your family returns? We didn't know, Emily said, about the house, the motel. Dad told us you wanted to move, that it was your decision. Ben continued. He said you wanted to be nearer to the coast. I smiled, but it wasn't warm. And you believed him? They both looked down. We should have checked, Emily whispered. We're here now, Ben said. I sat across from them, examining their faces, which were so familiar. Andrew had freckles as a child, and Emily would wrinkle her nose when she was anxious. What happens now? Emily asked. I fight, I replied simply, in court, in records, with all I have left. Ben seemed like he wanted to say more, but didn't. When they stood to leave, Emily hugged me, tentatively at first, then tighter. You don't deserve this, she said. I know, I answered. They stepped into the evening, just 2 kids, torn between love and loyalty. Perhaps that was the first crack in the wall Andrew had built, around the truth. As I closed the door behind them, I whispered what I had told myself in the mirror that morning. They forgot who I am, but I haven't. The day of the psychological evaluation arrived with rain. Not a downpour, just a steady whispering drizzle that turned the streets gray and made everything feel slower. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual that morning, brushing my hair, smoothing my blouse, checking the buttons on my cardigan twice, not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I knew how this worked. It wasn't about truth, but perception. Dr. Evelyn Monroe greeted me at her office door. She was in her early 60s, with kind eyes and a voice like velvet, warm but precise. I liked her immediately. I've reviewed the petition your attorney submitted, she said, as we sat across from each other. I understand there are concerns about your cognitive function. I gave a tight smile. Apparently, remembering a forged signature and recognizing your own name makes people uneasy. She smiled back. Let's just talk, she suggested. And we did, for over an hour. She asked about dates, names, my medications, my past, current events. I recited all the U.S. presidents backward, starting from Biden, listed my childhood addresses, explained compound interest. We discussed my weekly routine, financial choices, and sleep habits. Halfway through, she paused and said, You seem more grounded than most people my age. I raised a son through 2 economic downturns and a housing crisis and said, You don't navigate that with a foggy mind. She genuinely laughed, not mockingly, and when finished, handed me a small printed card. You'll receive a formal report soon, but I can tell you now, you're more than capable. Whatever they're suggesting won't hold in court, she assured me. I nodded. Thank you. I'm sorry you're going through this, she said softly. I'm not, I replied. Not anymore. Later that afternoon, Lynette called. She had already heard from Dr. Monroe. I'll submit the preliminary findings first thing tomorrow, she said. They tried to preempt it with a letter from an out-of-state psychiatrist who has never met you. Desperate, exactly. That evening, I sat at my small kitchen table, watching rain streak down the window. The apartment no longer felt cramped. It felt like a command center. Every corner held a strategy. Every drawer contained documents that could outlast someone's lies. My phone buzzed with a message from Andrew. Mom, please, we need to stop this. Let's talk. I didn't respond. He had asked to talk before, at the motel, through notes, outside the courtroom. Every conversation he suggested came after another layer of his deceit was revealed, each request wrapped in fear, not love. Still, I couldn't sleep that night, not due to self-doubt, but because I was mourning something unseen by others, the mother I had been for him. The woman who covered his mistakes, paid his debts, celebrated his successes, even when he barely acknowledged her, had been laid to rest somewhere between a motel parking lot and a forged document. But another woman had emerged, one who remembered the worth of her own name. The next day, Lynette and I met to finalize the complaint for the full hearing. We weren't just contesting the deed transfer and power of attorney. We were pressing charges: fraud, financial abuse, elder coercion. She listed them, ticking them off like a shopping list. We'll start with civil, but if the DA picks it up, there could face criminal charges too. I nodded and then handed her something I hadn't mentioned before. A copy of a check I wrote to Andrew 2 years ago for $75,000, labeled as a business loan, with my signature underneath and a notarized agreement he signed, promising to repay within 12 months. He never paid a cent. Lynette raised an eyebrow. Why didn't you mention this earlier? She asked. Because I thought I was being a good mother, I replied. Turns out I was just being taken advantage of. She slipped the check into the folder. This helps, she said. It shows a pattern. This wasn't just a one-time error. It was a gradual drain. That night, I had another visitor, not Andrew, not the twins. It was Kylie. She knocked gently, as if she didn't want anyone to hear. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. Margaret, she said, her voice slightly trembling. Can we talk? Only if it's not about how things spiraled out of control, I replied. She looked down. Andrew's losing sleep. The kids are scared. He's not himself. Maybe he's finally facing the part of himself he left behind, I said. She didn't smile. I didn't want it to go this way. No, I said. You wanted it quiet, no scandal. Just one more signature from the old woman you thought would keep silent. I thought you were tired, she whispered. I thought you wanted peace. I wanted respect, I said. Silence followed. I can't make him stop, she said, but maybe I could help. I crossed my arms. Why? Because I don't think you'll stop, and part of me doesn't want you to. I studied her face. There was something genuine in it. Not redemption, perhaps, but recognition. She pulled something from her purse, a flash drive. These are the emails, the documents, the communication with the staging company. I kept backups just in case. I took it. You'll have to testify, I said. I know, she replied. Against your husband. I know. She turned to leave, then paused. He thought you'd go quietly. I didn't respond. She walked away, and I locked the door, staring at the flash drive in my hand. Tomorrow I would open it. But tonight I would sit with the awareness that the tide had shifted again. He thought I wouldn't fight. He thought I'd crumble, but I'm still here, and I'm not finished. I waited until morning to plug in the flash drive, finding strength in the decision to not rush or react, but to wait patiently on my own terms. I made tea, took my medication, and opened the blinds to let in the dim light of another overcast morning. Only then did I settle at my small desk, open my laptop, and insert the drive into the port. It loaded slowly, as if hesitating to reveal its secrets. Inside were neatly labeled folders: deed prep, POA drafts, interior contracts, sale timeline. Yet it was the folder labeled correspondence that made my hands pause. I clicked on emails, dozens between Andrew and Kylie, Andrew and realtors, Andrew and a lawyer I was unfamiliar with. One thread dated months before the motel, with the subject line, Mom's assets urgent. I scrolled through it. If she becomes difficult, we'll claim she's confused. Her memory's slipping anyway. The key is to stay ahead. We can notarize the documents in advance. She doesn't need to be present. Just find someone who will stamp them. Once she's settled elsewhere, we'll change the locks, making it seem like it was her choice all along. I leaned back in my chair, the screen still aglow. I hadn't just been pushed out. I'd been systematically planned out, and now I had evidence. I printed everything, every email, every timeline, every contractor receipt with Andrew's signature, every date that matched the lies he told me. Then I picked up the phone. Lynette, I said, we're going to fight. She didn't ask questions. Bring it in. I'll prepare the exhibits. That afternoon, we filed an amended complaint with the court: intentional deception, fraudulent notarization, asset concealment, and breach of fiduciary duty or thoughts on the false POA. Lynette remarked that the judge would find it hard not to push it toward criminal referral. As I left her office, the sky had cleared, not just metaphorically, but literally. Blue stretched wide overhead for the first time in what felt like weeks, the city cleansed by the recent spring rains, glinting in the sunlight. Sunlight filtered through as I walked 2 blocks to the cafe where I used to bring Andrew when he was young. He enjoyed the sugar cubes. I always gave him 2. I ordered tea and sat by the window. Across the street, a playground was bustling, with a little boy chasing pigeons as his mother laughed when he stumbled. I pondered what kind of man that boy would grow into, who he'd blame when times were tough, and who he'd expect to fix his problems. That night, I received another call from Evelyn Monroe, the psychologist. I finished my report, she said. It's done and submitted. And Margaret, I went a bit further. What do you mean? I included an additional opinion on cognitive abuse based on your history, independence, and the timeline. It's evident to me that your son used feigned concern as a weapon. I was silent. Most people don't fight back, she added. They're too scared of losing what little they have left. But you're not most people. No, I replied. I'm not. The next day, the court clerk called to say the hearing date had been moved up. Kylie's testimony had expedited the process, especially with the emails, now part of the official record. They're shaken, Lynette told me. I want them in the room when I speak, I said. You'll have that, she assured me. Over the following 2 days, I hardly slept as I rehearsed my statement. I rewrote it and practiced it aloud, looking in the mirror and reciting it to my reflection. It wasn't dramatic or sentimental, just facts, clear and precise, as truth should be. On the day of the hearing, I wore my navy dress, the one they thought I'd be too old to care about. I adorned myself with my mother's brooch, the silver leaf-shaped one, a family heirloom, not something disposable. The courtroom was crowded with a few reporters and spectators, but I paid no attention to them. My focus was solely on Andrew, who appeared smaller and less confident, as if the weight of his scheme had finally burdened him. Kylie sat beside him, looking pale but composed. The judge addressed the room and then turned to me. Mrs. Delaney, she said, you may proceed. I rose and spoke. My name is Margaret Delaney. I am 74 years old, born in this state. I raised my son alone after my husband passed unexpectedly at 47. I paid off our mortgage and funded my son's education, never missing a bill. My voice was steady. I was removed from my home under false pretenses, my accounts accessed with a forged power of attorney, and my house listed for sale without my knowledge. I was labeled confused, too old, too slow to notice, but I did notice. I held up the documents. I noticed everything. I am here today to make it clear. I do not give permission. I do not give silence. I do not disappear. The room was silent enough to hear the judge place her pen down. Lynette stood and said, "We rest, Your Honor." The judge nodded and announced, "We will reconvene in 3 days with a ruling." We exited the courtroom in silence. In the hallway, Andrew caught up to me, hesitating before saying, "You've made your point." I turned to face him completely. "No," I stated. "I've drawn my line, and you've crossed it for the last time." He didn't pursue me. He simply stood there alone as I walked out. The sunlight, not just waiting on the sidewalk, but also within my very bones. 3 days later, I dressed slowly, not out of nervousness, but because I grasped the significance of what lay ahead. You don't enter a room where your future will be determined without pausing, without acknowledging the long journey in shoes that often weren't kind to your feet. I wore the same navy dress, the same brooch, but this time I added lipstick, not bright, not loud, just enough. Lynette met me on the courthouse steps. "Today is about clarity," she said. "The judge has all the evidence and testimony. Now it's up to her." Inside, the courtroom was quieter than before, with fewer people and no reporters, only those who had to be there and those who had nowhere else to go. Andrew sat with his lawyer, shoulders tense. Kylie was not beside him this time. Instead, she sat alone on the other side of the room. The judge entered, and we stood, then sat and waited. She read from a prepared statement, her tone calm and firm, like someone who had carefully considered every word. In the matter of Delaney versus Delaney, the court finds that the power of attorney filed on behalf of Mr. Andrew Delaney was fraudulent, lacking verifiable consent, and improperly notarized. Moreover, the property transfer was conducted under misrepresentation and without the voluntary participation of the original deed holder, Mrs. Margaret Delaney. She paused. Effective immediately, all rights, ownership, and control revert to Mrs. Delaney. All accounts accessed under the forged POA will undergo an audit. The sale is void, and the locks will be changed under court supervision. I heard a gasp, unsure if it was from Andrew or myself. The judge continued, recommending a referral for potential criminal investigation under the district attorney's jurisdiction with possible charges including fraud, elder abuse, and unlawful conduct. Possession of the property struck like a bolt of lightning in the room. Andrew turned to his lawyer, who leaned in and quickly whispered something. Andrew's hands fidgeted on the table. The judge addressed me. Mrs. Delaney, your case sets a precedent, not only for legal redress, but for dignity. You remembered your identity, and let it be recorded that the court did as well. I stood as she left, not because anyone prompted me, but because I needed the gravitas of the moment to anchor itself in my spine. Outside, the sun was high, and Lynette walked beside me, holding papers, a quiet satisfaction in her stride. That's the hard part, she said. No, I replied. That was necessary. The hard part was the silence, the doubt. As we reached the sidewalk, she asked, "What now?" I looked down the street. Home. The word had transformed, not merely a house, not just bricks, windows, and roses by the fence, but a place I never truly left, even when someone tried to take it. I go back, I said, and this time I carry the key. Later that afternoon, a court-appointed locksmith met me at my front door. He was considerate, asked no questions, simply nodded as I showed him the door, the garage, the side gate. Within an hour, every lock was changed, erasing their access. I stepped inside, finding dust on the floor and a faint scent of furniture polish. Yet it was still mine. The couch and curtains were gone, but the floorboards creaked just as they always had, and sunlight streamed onto the kitchen tiles as before. I walked through each room, discovering my grandmother's mirror in the garage, wrapped in a moving blanket, and my teacups in a box labeled for donations. I unpacked them slowly, placing each one in the cupboard where they belonged, not for charity, but for continuity. That night, I sat in the living room on a chair they hadn't taken, sipping tea. Outside, the wind rustled the hydrangeas. Inside, I felt something settle. Not joy, not triumph, just truth. I hadn't won everything, but I had reclaimed myself, and that, I realized, was enough. I didn't expect for good. I paused, considering my response. Yes, I said, he won't be coming back. Ben nodded, absorbing the truth. Emily reached over and squeezed his hand. It's strange, Ben admitted, not having him here. I know, I replied, but sometimes change is necessary. We sat quietly for a moment, the weight of the past lingering in the air. But you're safe now, I assured them both, and that's what matters. Emily smiled, a hint of relief in her eyes. We'll get used to it, she said, and together we'll move forward. Going to jail, I said, wasn't my decision. It's now up to the district attorney. Emily gazed at her plate. He's upset, she said. He thinks you destroyed everything. I'm sure he does, I replied. He believes you betrayed him. I took a sip of tea. No, he betrayed me, and I just reacted. Ben nodded, not fully comprehending, but accepting it nonetheless. You didn't deserve this, Emily said. No one does, I answered, but that doesn't stop it from occurring. I didn't ask them to choose sides, nor did I scold or elaborate further. I let them sit in the house they once ran through with popsicles, allowing the reality to sink in. Later, Emily entered the living room, standing before the fireplace, staring at the space where my photos once were. They packed all this up, she said. Did they? Why? To make it seem like I had already left. She turned to me. Do you have the pictures? I nodded, saying they were in a box, still unpacked. She crossed the room, opened the nearest box, and began lifting them out, one by one, frames wrapped in newspaper, memories carefully unwrapped. Ben joined her, and they placed them back on the mantel. Me with Harold, Andrew as a child, Emily's kindergarten photo, the faded picture of my mother in her wedding dress. The room started to feel like mine again, not because of the walls, but because of what they contained. When they left, I hugged them both. No tears, just long, quiet embraces that conveyed both apology and forgiveness without words. After they left, I sat in the kitchen, staring at the table, at the note Andrew had left in the apartment, still folded, still unsigned, still unanswered. I didn't need to open it again. I already knew its contents. What mattered now was what I said, and I chose to say nothing. Sometimes silence isn't about absence. Sometimes it's the most powerful statement of all. The next morning, I called Donna. I need a new will, I told her, and a living trust. She didn't question why, just instructed, come in at noon. The last one I created was almost 15 years ago, right after Harold passed away and during a time when I had unwavering faith in Andrew. The house had been unintentionally left to him, along with my accounts, my possessions, even the small cedar box containing my wedding ring. I trusted him to manage everything carefully. Now, every clause required revision. When I arrived, Donna had already prepared a draft. We reviewed it meticulously, not because I doubted her, but because I refused to sign anything without fully understanding its implications. No house to Andrew, I stated. No access to accounts. No health care decisions. Nothing. Understood, she responded, adding that if he contested, a no contest clause would be included. Anyone disputing the will would lose everything. I nodded, took the pen, and signed my name slowly and deliberately, with the characteristic broken loop in my G and the slight slant in my D, making my signature uniquely mine. Once finished, she notarized it, the stamp clicking onto the paper like a door locking. I'll keep a copy on file, she said, and I'll notify Lynette. Good. Back home, I opened the box of keepsakes, untouched since my return. Inside were photos, cards, old recipe clippings, and near the bottom, a letter from Harold, written the year before his death. His handwriting always seemed deeply pressed into the page. If you ever have to stand alone, Maggie, it read, do so with your back straight and your hands steady. You've always been stronger than you think. I read it twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. That evening, a letter arrived in the mail, a real envelope with a real stamp from Andrew. No return address. Inside, a handwritten page. Mom, you've made your point. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I'm writing anyway, not to make excuses. I know I crossed a line. I panicked and let Kylie's fears and our debt drive me into something unacceptable, but I need you to know it. I thought my reluctance was due to weakness, thinking I was shielding you when I was truly shielding myself. I'm sorry. I don't anticipate forgiveness, but I felt the need to express this, Andrew. After folding the letter, I placed it in the same drawer as Harold's, not because it held the same significance, but because it came from the same son who once gifted me dandelions in a paper cup. I didn't reply. Apologies are like seeds. They need time in the soil. Some flourish, while others don't. The following morning, I contacted a woman named Esther, a retired social worker I knew from church, who remained perceptive and engaged. We had tea on the porch, and I recounted my story, not seeking sympathy, but with purpose. I want to help other women like me, I said, those who are pushed aside in their own lives and confuse silence with safety. She nodded, mentioning a shelter program in need of individuals like me, women with real-life experience, not just legal experts. I'm interested, I said. Then we'll get you involved, she replied. Later that evening, I stood in my kitchen, observing my surroundings. The cupboards weren't full yet, and the house still echoed in places, but it was mine once more, and I wasn't afraid of the silence. I took a notebook from the drawer and wrote on the first page, "This is how it began, not with a dramatic event or betrayal, but by losing and then rediscovering myself loudly enough to be heard." I closed it, knowing there was more to write, but for now, I had found peace. Not because it was given to me, but because I seized it. The first time I addressed the women at the shelter, I hadn't planned on saying much. I brought tea and cookies, something small, something ordinary. The staff introduced me simply. "Margaret's here to share her story, if she's comfortable." I wasn't sure I was, but I stood up anyway, remembering what it felt like to be overlooked, to be treated as a problem rather than a person. There were 9 women in the room, of varying ages and faces, but sharing the same weariness in their shoulders. The same wary look in their eyes. I didn't start at the motel, but with the house. I lived in that house for 39 years. My son grew up there. My husband passed away there. My garden flourished every spring. It was mine, I said. They watched me silently, waiting. One day, someone decided I no longer needed it. I shared everything with them slowly, plainly, without drama or exaggeration, just the facts, the forged documents, the bank, the courtroom, the silence, the memory of my own name. A woman around 50 asked, "How did you know it was really happening and not just you losing control?" "I didn't," I replied. "Not at first, because that's how they do it. They take your confidence first, then your keys." They laughed quietly, bitterly, but they understood. "I got it all back," I said. "Not everything I lost, but everything I needed." When I left that day, a staff member caught my hand. "They're going to ask for you again. You know that, right?" "I'm not a speaker," I replied. "No, but you're a mirror, and they haven't seen themselves clearly in a long time." That night, I sat in the living room with a blanket over my knees and old photo albums spread around me. I paused at one page. Andrew at 7, grinning with missing teeth in front of a Lego tower we built together. I remembered that afternoon. He called it Delaney Tower and believed it would last forever. It collapsed the next morning when the cat jumped on the table. I I turned the page. Emily, holding a spoon larger than her face, Ben dressed as a robot. Their innocence was still intact, still reachable. I realized then this wasn't the end of a story, but the beginning of my own, not the one I gave away as a mother or managed as a wife, but the one I wrote myself, finally and unapologetically. A week later, I returned to court, not for my case, but for the DA's announcement, formal charges of fraud, elder financial abuse, forgery, and misrepresentation. Andrew didn't look at me in the hallway. Kylie did, and gave a slight nod. She would testify. They mentioned that the emails, the flash drive, and her witness statement all proved she wasn't innocent, but her cooperation was crucial now. I didn't speak at the press table. The law was now my voice. Lynette met me outside afterward. They might offer him a plea deal, she said. Will it prevent him from harming someone else? Yes, I replied. Then let it happen. She looked at me for a long time. You're different, she commented. No, I said. I'm finally the same on the outside as I've always been inside. That afternoon, I went to the hardware store and bought paint, a soft blue for the kitchen and pale green for the hallway, something clean and fresh. The young man at the counter offered to carry it to my car, and I accepted. Are you doing all this on your own? He asked. I've done tougher things, I replied, and I had. Back home, I changed into old clothes, opened the windows, and started rolling color onto the walls, one strip and one layer at a time, covering the past and preparing for what lay ahead. The paint dried slowly. Each morning, I walked through the house with a mug of tea, touching the walls not to check the finish, but to feel the transformation, the way a room changes when it becomes yours again, and how silence can finally resonate with peace. I took my time with the rest, rehung the curtains, planted basil in the window box, and called the roofer about the leak I had ignored for years, always assuming someone else would handle it. Now I embrace the responsibility and the choice, and with every nail hammered back into place, I reclaim more than just a house. I was reclaiming the rhythm of my life. Emily started visiting on Saturdays, bringing slightly squashed pastries from the bus ride and sitting at the kitchen table while I cooked. She never asked to help. She just showed up, which was more than anyone had done in years. One day, she brought a man named Max with kind eyes, a gentle voice, and hands that didn't fidget when he sat at my table. He inquired about the hydrangeas, and when I told him they weren't blooming this year, the people captured in them. That year, he offered to assist with moving the dirt. I'm not here to fix anything, he softly remarked, just to help where I can. After they departed, I sat alone and smiled, not because of him, but because of her. She was discovering her own path just as I had, and she was doing it with awareness. Ben visited too, albeit less frequently, always awkward, but genuinely sincere. He brought his sketches, once bashfully showing me a portrait he had drawn of the old house, as he remembered it before the renovations. He had depicted me, standing at the window, observing. You always seemed like you were contemplating something important, he said. I usually was, I replied, and we chuckled. That Sunday, I received a certified letter from Andrew's attorney. Inside was a formal apology, typed, notarized, and laden with legal jargon, yet sufficiently clear. He confessed to forgery, acting without permission, and misusing my name and property. The statement would be used in court as part of his plea deal. There was also a separate handwritten note. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to put it in writing, not for the court, but for you. I took something sacred and turned it transactional. I thought I was saving us, but I was really saving myself from disgrace. You didn't deserve it. I understand that now. Signed, Andrew. I folded it once and placed it in the same drawer as the others. That letter would not be framed or destroyed. It would simply reside there quietly, like a wound that had healed enough to stop bleeding but still recalled the pain. That night, I took a long bath, my first since returning to the house. I allowed the water to rise slowly and hot, covering my knees, hips, and ribs, holding me, not as a rescue, but as a respite. For the first time in a long while, I didn't dwell on what had been lost. I reflected on what I had retained, my voice, my name, my determination. When I finished, I dressed in fresh clothes and wandered barefoot through each room, with no music or television, just the sound of a house that had relearned how to listen. I paused in front of the mantel, touched each photograph with 2 fingers, and softly spoke the names of the individuals in them are not for remembrance, but for continuity. They hadn't left, nor had I. At the edge of the living room, I placed something new, a small frame of simple wood with no glass, holding the first page of my notebook. This is how it began, with a blank page underneath, waiting not for someone else to fill it, but for me. Some days, I forget it ever happened, not because the pain has vanished, but because the story no longer dominates the room when I enter. Now, when I wake up, the first thing I notice is the light, softly pouring through the window above my kitchen sink, resting on the floor where I stood every morning for 40 years. It feels less like nostalgia and more like an achievement. I no longer dread the mailbox, no longer question the sound of a knock, and I no longer silently rehearse my worth, awaiting someone else to define it. I am aware of who I am. The district attorney accepted Andrew's plea. No jail time, restitution, public acknowledgement of guilt, community service. The judge decreed that he should serve in places reminding him of those he tried to silence. I didn't object and didn't attend the sentencing, allowing the system to speak for me. I was done narrating that chapter of my life. I've moved forward, not simply moved on, because some things should not be forgotten, ensuring they don't recur. The shelter now asks me to speak monthly, and there's a waiting list for my sessions. Women arrive early, bringing notebooks, taking notes not on my story, but on theirs. One hugged me last week and whispered, I thought I was the only one. You're never the only one, I assured her. You're simply the first to voice it. Emily calls every Friday. Ben sends sketches. Little moments arrive like unexpected sunlight, welcomed. Kylie sent me a Christmas card without a return address. I didn't respond, yet I didn't discard it either. Sometimes I still speak to Harold softly, not expecting replies, but just sharing the space. See what I did, I say aloud. See what I remembered. And in those quiet moments, I swear I can sense his smile. There's no retaliation in what I did, no grand plot twist, just dignity gathered piece by piece, just truth spoken unapologetically, and just a woman, older now, still stronger, who learned that the most dangerous lie isn't the one they tell about you. It's the one they persuade you to believe. So if you're reading this and you felt it, whatever it is, know this. You are not a burden, not a ghost in someone else's story, not finished. Stand up, say your name, reclaim one small thing today. Your password, your bank account, your keys, and then the next. You don't need to destroy bridges to move on. You just need to remember you were never meant to fade away silently. Not you.